To ensure every child survives and thrives to reach their full potential, we must focus on improving the care around the time of birth. The initial few hours in a child's life are critical in building a foundation for optimal development of the child. Today we have with us Dr. Prakash, an acclaimed pediatrician and a renowned neonatologist who is here to highlight on the peripartum intervention for intact newborn survival.
Good morning to one and all. So it's a yearly session. So the next 25 to 30 minutes, we are going to see about perinatal interventions for the intact survival of neonates. I always starts my slide with thanking my two institutes. One is the Institute of Obstetrics and Gynecology, where I'm associated with this unit institute for the past 11 years, as well as 3 years my residency program at AIMS. I thank all the parents of the babies who taught me neonatology, as well as who fine-tuned my neonatology skills. I especially like to thank my teachers, without whom I would not enter into the specialty of neonatology. They were instrumental in me entering into the specialty of neonatology, as well as who fine-tuned my skills and imparted a depth of knowledge about neonatology. And what I am now is just because of these people's blessings. So where do we stand? This is the SRS data of the NMR, which shows that southern part of India fares well when compared to the northern parts of India, right? And the major chunk or the contributors of this neonatal mortality in India belongs to the preterm category, right? The preterm births contributes to the major births cause of mortality. That is about 43.7%, followed by this intrapartum related complications about 92%, and infection closely by infections about 20%. So there are a umpty number of proven interventions available. Okay, each and every intervention itself is an 1 hour to 2 hours topic which we can discuss. Here I am going to enlighten about the 10 most important topics which have been proved beyond doubt, which is very keen in giving a intact survival of this preterm births. What you are going to see is about antenatal steroids, the antenatal magnesium sulfate, intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis, delayed cord clamping, the target saturation of newborns, prophylactic caffeine given to neonates, mist or the Lizard techniques, therapeutic hypothermia, delivery room CPAP, kangaroo mother care, exclusive breastfeeding, aggressive nutrition, and non-invasive. So it may not be possible for me to give in depth. I will cover almost all the topics up to your KMC, kangaroo mother care. So what is this antenatal steroids? So most of us are aware that Cochrane is a systematic review and meta-analysis which every clinician considered as the Bible, which is the truth or gospel, right? So the Cochrane symbol is based on this antenatal status. Initially, now recently the Cochrane meta-analysis forest plot has changed for this antenatal steroids, but the old antenatal steroids systematic review by Crowther, this forest plot symbol, this you can see this symbol here. This one is nothing but the forest plot of your antenatal steroids. That was the one which used. So most of the systematic reviews in Cochrane will say that further studies are required, right? Further research has to be done to come to an conclusion. But there are very few topics where Cochrane definitely says it's beyond doubt is beneficial, start using it. One among them is going to be your antenatal steroids. So this is the recent Cochrane published. The previous one was up to 2017. This one was a recent thing updated in December 2020. So it was about 27 studies and 11,000 mothers and 11,000 babies. There was approximately 30% decrease in your respiratory distress syndrome, RDS. 30% decrease in your respiratory distress syndrome. Around 42% decrease in your intraventricular hemorrhage. 15% decrease in your perinatal deaths, 22% reduction in your neonatal deaths, and nearly a 50% decrease in your development delay in childhood. Okay, so such a huge benefit by giving this antenatal steroids. Around 50% decrease in your development delay, around 40% decrease in your IVH, around 30% decrease in your RDS, and around 15 to 22% decrease in your neonatal deaths and perinatal deaths. This is the impact of giving a antenatal steroid to the mother. So indications and contraindications, this is clearly mentioned in our Government of India guidelines. There are definite indications are only 4. One, the mother should have a true preterm labor. Mother should have a true preterm labor. If there is a antepartum hemorrhage, if the mother is an antepartum hemorrhage, we expect delivery to happen very shortly. So we have to give an antenatal steroids. Preterm premature rupture of membrane. It's a PPROM. We are supposed to give antenatal steroids, and severe preeclampsia. So these are the 4 absolute indications to give your antenatal steroids. It's a true preterm labor, antepartum hemorrhage, preterm PPROM, and your severe preeclampsia. So frank chorioamnitis is a absolute contraindication for using using the antenatal steroids. We know the definition of chorioamnitis. It's going to be an history of fever and low abdominal pain. There will be a foul smelling vaginal discharge, tachycardia, and uterine tenderness, along with a fetal tachycardia. Any 2 out of these 3 is there, then you think in terms of a frank chorioamnitis. So maternal diabetes, preeclampsia, and hypertension are not a contraindications for using steroids. In fact, these are the conditions where we are supposed to give steroids. We expect lots of complications in these babies. So maternal GDM or a maternal IDM or a hypertension or imminent eclampsia, these are the mothers who must receive, because we expect lots and lots of complications in the neonates. Okay, so these are not a contraindications to give steroids. We can control the diabetes by giving insulin, right? And we can control your hypertension by giving your antihypertensives, IV medicines. In India, we prefer dexamethasone. So abroad, they go for betamethasone. There are reasons why we prefer dexamethasone over betamethasone. We should know why we prefer dexamethasone. Government of India also recommends the use of dexamethasone. It is a WHO essential medicine. It's inexpensive as well as easily available. That's one of the reasons. But the most important reason is the salt form of dexamethasone is dexamethasone phosphate. And betamethasone is also betamethasone phosphate. But whatever studies have been done abroad, as well as in the systematic reviews which has come, they have used a combination of betamethasone phosphate and acetate. What they say is a celestone. That is a drug which is a combination of phosphate, betamethasone phosphate, and betamethasone acetate. What is the importance of it? Betamethasone phosphate is a short-acting one. Acetate is a long-acting drug. Okay. So when you give a combination of both, the betamethasone phosphate increases your level, the blood level of your steroid level, and the acetate level will maintain that level of your steroids in their blood. Whereas if you are going to give betamethasone phosphate, it's just an acute surge. We have to give a frequent dose. The dosage we give betamethasone in India is 24 hours once. That is meant for a celestone. That is meant for a combination of a short-acting and long-acting. That is not meant for a short-acting. Okay. If at all we are going to give betamethasone, we are supposed to give a frequent dose rather than the routine dose we are giving. Instead of that, go for the known drug, dexamethasone, where it has been time tested, it is used routinely, and we know the dynamics of it, we know the pharmacokinetics of it, we know how it's going to work. Whereas betamethasone alone you are preferring, then the efficacy might not be good. We have to go for a combination of betamethasone phosphate and acetate. As well as betamethasone has to be stored in a cold environment, whereas dexa doesn't require any sort of specifications like storage in a at particular temperature. So recommendations by various committees, ACOG and NICE guidelines, it's very clear cut that babies born between 24 weeks to 34 weeks of gestation, we have to give steroids if you are anticipating the delivery within the next 7 days. So 24 to 34 weeks of gestation, both your NICE guidelines as well as your ACOG guidelines, ACOG is the American Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology, both say between 24 to 34 weeks, we are supposed to give antenatal steroids. The question arises before 24 weeks and after 34 weeks is the question, right? So there's no confusion about 24 to 34 weeks. Before 25 weeks, yes, it is beneficial. It is proven in previous studies like 22, 23, even in 21 weeks, giving antenatal steroids is beneficial. If you are going to expect the delivery within the next 1 week, if the parents wants to continue, want you to resuscitate, want you to save the baby, you must go ahead with steroids for babies between 21, 22 and 23 weeks of gestation. So what about the late preterm? So there is a difference of opinion regarding your late preterm steroids. There was a study by ALB study which was published around 4 years before, which showed that there is a benefit of late preterm steroids, babies delivered between 34 to 36 weeks. Yes, There is a benefit. But what the benefit is? It's going to decrease your surfactant. Okay, the number of surfactants given is going to be reduced. It decreases your NICU admission rate. It decreases your BPD. It decreases your RDS, severity of RDS. It decreases your TTNB. But the problem was the number of babies who got hypoglycemia was pretty high in the group who received steroids. It was around some 24% in the group and compared to 15% in the control group. So in a scenario like India where the monitoring might be a problem, so now we have taken a stand not to give steroids. Most of the units don't give steroids for late preterm babies between 34 to 36 weeks. We don't recommend the administration of annual steroids between 34 to 36 weeks because the disadvantage overweights the advantages of giving these things. You can manage a TTNB which is giving oxygen, right? So, but if the baby goes for hyperglycemia, it's going to be a long-term sequelae. So, the disadvantage is pretty high. So, it is not routinely followed to give a. And there is a study going on, ALPS 2 study by Stanford, I think Yasser Arafat is conducting. Maybe we might change this practice after a few years. As of now, we don't recommend to give a late steroids and annual steroids. Repeat dose of steroids, you can consider giving a repeat course of steroids if the rescue course could be provided as early as 7 days from the prior dose. Okay, if you can give a repeat course, only one repeat course is allowed as per your ACOG, and NICE gives a very skeptical. He doesn't routinely recommend it. He uses very diplomatic words so that you can use it. You can give a repeat course of steroids. You can give a repeat course of steroids, but it should be at least 7 days after the previous dose, and you should expect the delivery within the 7 days. So one repeat course can be given for extreme babies like less than 28 weeks you can give the babies. So WHO recommendation, it's a conditional recommendation based on moderate quality evidence. A single repeat course of annual steroids is recommended if preterm birth doesn't occur within 7 days after the initial days, and a subsequent clinical assessment demonstrate there's a high risk of preterm birth in 7 days. We try to avoid giving a repeat course steroids, but it's going to be an extreme premature, then we give a shot of repeat course steroids because there are disadvantages as pretty high. There is a 5-year follow-up study has not shown a huge difference in the outcomes. Max Self. Next intervention, first we have discussed about annual steroids. Next comes your magnesium sulfate for neuroprotection. So magnesium sulfate, it has a various mechanisms or hypothesis has been postulated. One is a stabilization of your cerebral circulation. It's prevention of your excitatory injury to the neuronal membranes. It prevents your oxidative injury, and it has anti-inflammatory effects also. There are around 4 to 5 trials which used magnesium sulfate like MAGPIE, PREMAG. These are the BEAM trial. These are the major studies which are showed. When you take the individual studies by itself didn't show any benefit actually. There was a trend towards benefit, but individual studies per se didn't show any benefit. But when it came to the systematic review, when you combine all these things, then we are able to see a benefit of giving magnesium sulfate for if you are going to give to the mothers less than 34 weeks of gestation. But we in India, in Tamil Nadu, we recommend to give magnesium sulfate for less than 32 weeks. Why? The number need to benefit is pretty high. For example, if you're going to give for mothers less than 34 weeks, if you're going to give for 55 mothers, one baby will get benefited. Whereas if you're going to give less than 32 weeks, around 40 mothers you're going to give, one baby is going to be benefited. So benefit is going to be more the lower the gestational age. If you take 28 weeks, even lesser number of mothers, you will get a benefit. For example, 20 mothers, if you're going to give, one baby is going to get benefited. So the lesser gestation, the benefit is more. So generally we recommend from 32 weeks onwards as per Government of India guidelines. So before 32 weeks it's recommended. It's a strong recommendation based on a moderate quality evidence. If the babies are exposed to magnesium sulfate, there is a 39%, approximately 40% decrease in your gross motor dysfunction, as well as significant reduction in your cerebral palsy by 30%. Okay. ACNOG guidelines also and NICE guidelines recommends it's for less than 34 weeks. Next comes your intrapartum antibiotic. Your third intervention is going to be your intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis. The intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis, all this data are based upon the GBS infection. The guidelines was all proposed based on your GBS data. So positive, they see, look for the positive green for GBS from the either vagina or rectum. Any positive history or any birth of an infant with GBS or GBS bacteria is there. unknown antepartum culture reports. If the mother has a fever more than 100.4 degree Fahrenheit or temperatures more than 38 degrees centigrade, and you expect a preterm labor less than 37 weeks of gestation with a preterm premature rupture of membrane, or there is a prolonged rupture of membrane more than 18 hours, you are supposed to give a intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis. So, GBS is susceptible to extended penicillin, cephalosporins and vancomycin, and penicillin G we know is a single most active drug for it, and CDC recommends penicillin, ampicillin and cefazolin, and there is no resistance observed for these drugs. So, prophylaxis should be given at least 4 hours prior to the delivery. So, this is an algorithm showing that if the mother is allergic to penicillin and not allergic to penicillin. If the mother is allergic to penicillin, then you have to go with cefazolin or vancomycin or clindamycin. This is a Cochrane review on early onset GBS. There is a non-statistical decrease in your neonatal mortality among the babies who are born to mothers who are given intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis. Next comes your fourth intervention of delayed cord clamping. So, as per Darwin, another very injurious to the child is the tying and cutting of the navel string too soon, which should always be left until the child has not only repeatedly breathed but till all the pulsations of the cord also ceases, as otherwise the child is much weaker than it ought to be. A proportion of that belongs to the baby is left in the placenta, which is out to have been in the child. So, by doing a yearly cord clamping, what you are doing is the blood which is supposed to go to the baby, we are denying the baby of the blood which is supposed to go to the baby by doing a yearly cord clamping, which belongs to the baby. The amount of blood which is supposed to go to the baby, we do a cord clamping yearly and we prevent that extra blood which is going to the baby. So, redistribution of the placenta blood in the first 180 seconds. So, red one shows the blood volume saved in infants, and the blue one is the natural resource of blood in the placenta. As the x-axis shows the time. As the time goes by, you see the blood volume saved in the blood. The red margin increases, the red line increases as the time goes by, right? 30, 45, 60, as the time goes by, the red one increases. What is supposed, which belongs to the baby, goes to the baby if you are giving a adequate time. So, the amount of blood transfused from the placenta. This is also from the time of cord clamping at birth and volume of fetal blood transfused. You can see as the time passes, the graph slowly increases. This is in ml per kg. It shows that the amount of blood, if you give more time, the more amount of blood goes to the baby, which belongs to the baby. Okay. This is another from a paper, shows the amount of blood in the 30 centimeters of umbilical cord. These are 3 various studies which is shows that the amount of blood in the 30 centimeters, as you allow the amount of blood which goes to the baby also slowly increases. Okay. What is the advantage of it? This is an animal study taken from a sheep model. So, this one is the line, 2 lines are your snapshot. These are the lines where the cord clamping has been done. This is an example of an unventilated and a ventilated baby. This is the carotid artery pressure, pulmonary artery pressure, pulmonary blood flow, ductal arterial blood flow and carotid artery blood flow. You can see the ductal arterial blood flow after cord clamping increases, right? And as well as the variability is also less. So, such a fluctuations in your pressure is less. If your fluctuations and pressure is going to be more in your extreme preterm, the chance of going to be a IVH is going to be more. We can see it's also for your pulmonary artery pressure. The threshold itself increases, right? It increases, and the fluctuations are also the range of movements. From here you can see the pulmonary blood flow. It's such a variable difference, but your amplitude is just around the midline. It's very close to the midline. The fluctuations of pressure is very less, right? So, the variability in pressure is going to be less. The amount of blood flow is going to be more if you're going to do a delayed cord clamping. So, what are the benefits of in-term baby? Higher hemoglobin at 12 months, increased ferritin at the first year, increased iron stores at first year, improved survival from malaria and endemic areas, lower circulating red in regions with higher air pollution, and there's a competitive effect between iron and lead. What is the advantages or benefits in a preterm baby? Higher circulating blood volume from 24 to 48 hours. So, extra amount of blood goes, the amount of blood transfusion is going to be less, right? You are giving some extra amount of blood, the number of blood transfusions are going to be less in a preemie baby. The blood pressure is going to be very stable. The chance of requirement of inotropic support and bolus as well as blood transfusion is going to be very less in these babies. Reduced need of inotropic support. The blood flow, SVC, shows your blood flow to the brain, right? The blood flow to the brain is improved, as well as the fluctuations pressure is going to be less. increase your cardiac output. The preload is going to be increased by increased amount of blood which is going to go. So obviously your cardiac output is increased. Higher cerebral oxygenation index, lower frequency of IVH, and no difference in the rate of a severe IVH. It decreases your grade 1 and grade 2, but there's no difference in your severe IVH. Timing of umbilical cord clamping. Various guidelines like Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology, WHO, European Association, and International Licensing Committee, they give somewhere between 1 minute for a term baby. For preterm baby, it's 30 to 90 seconds. It's variable across this society guidelines. So this is a systematic review showing the benefits in the mother. The good thing is the postpartum hemorrhage is not much in the mother if you're going to do a delayed cord clamping. That's the only thing which you're afraid. If you're going to take a lot of time, separation and postpartum hemorrhage could be more. There's no difference in your postpartum hemorrhage in the mothers. Neonatal outcome, as we have seen, the benefits which have seen a snapshot view. We have seen the decrease in incidence of your IVH, decrease in your hemoglobin concentration, iron. This is an example. This is a systematic review showing that in numbers how much amount it increases. With regards to your rabies study, effect of delayed cord clamping and preterm births, this is very important. 41% reduction in your IVH. There is a 38%. You can remember the number 40. Almost everything is around 40. 40% IVH, 40% NEC, 40% the requirement for multiple transfusions are lesser in the babies who are required a delayed transfusion. Okay. Next. So, but the survey says that the delivery is conducted by the ANMs are far better. They do a delayed cord clamping when the obstetricians, when you compare to obstetricians, the delayed cord clamping, they are very tensed up and stressed out and they don't do a delayed cord clamping. You can see in the survey, this is an old study, 2015 data, which shows that around 50% only they go for a delayed cord clamping. So, skip the slide. So, there is a question about umbilical cord milking. So, where we can do a umbilical cord milking. If you don't have a time for umbilical cord clamping, where you can do milking. So, this is a systematic review where we can do is 3 times you can milk. You should leave a segment of about 25 to 30 centimeters length, ask the logicians to leave, and you can milk it thrice 20 centimeters length, you can milk it, and various studies they have shown various things, 5 centimeters per thing, but the routine practice is 20 centimeter segments at least 2 to 3 times you can milk for 2 seconds for one milking. Okay, that is one thing. Can we do it for all? Yes, we'll discuss in the next things. Milking is also shown to be, this forest plot shows the benefit effect. This milking has shown that it decreases your IVH, right? IVH. Not for all babies, for babies more than 28 weeks, right? So it can be done. So what protocol we can use? Exclusion criteria, birth asphyxia. If you are going to resuscitate by the side of the baby with intact, if the equipments are available, you can do in asphyxia. But as of now, the feasibility and affordability is not there. So exclusion criteria have included RH isomerization, HIV positive, eye drops, SGA less than third centile. HGA less than third centile is a relative contraindication. So duration for term baby it's 1 to 3 minutes. For preterm baby is 30 seconds to 120 seconds. So where are we supposed to keep thing? The baby can be held 20 centimeters either above or below the vaginal introitus. The height of the baby could be either 20 centimeters above or below the introitus you can keep. For preterm babies it is 30 to 120 seconds. Milking of the cord, term baby yes, preterm more than or equal to 28 weeks yes, for less than and equal to 27 weeks no. The incidence of IVH is more, we are not supposed to do your milking for babies less than or equal to 27 weeks. Procedure at 20 centimeters segment 3 times and 2 seconds for each milking can be done for milking. Target saturation, so it is based on a systematic review, meta-analysis which included your support trial, boost, 3 boost trials and cord trial, which showed that there is a 2 saturations targeted they have kept. One is a lower saturation and higher saturation. Higher saturation means it's 90 to 95% saturation. There's advantages, certain advantages using this target saturation of 90 to 95, and whereas using a target saturation of less than 90, right? 88 to 92 saturation they have used. Where they've seen the benefits of the mortality, necrotizing enterocolitis, brain injury, and PDA was pretty high in the lower saturation target group. Okay, your odd outcomes like death was pretty high in the group who had a lower target saturation, whereas the other outcomes like ROP and your bronchopulmonary dysplasia, where the saturations are maintained low, that was lesser oxygen, lesser RP, lesser BPD, but deaths were more. Since we are concerned, it's more importance given to your hard outcome like death, we'll go for a saturation somewhat liberal by 90 to 95%. That's the reason we go for a target saturation of 90 to 95 in babies, and we don't keep a low saturation because a death is pretty high in groups where you go for a low oxygen saturation. So prophylactic caffeine is based upon the CAP trial where they used caffeine to see the neurodevelopment outcome. They give prophylactic caffeine for babies within the 24 hours for babies less than 1250 grams, from 500 grams to 1050 grams, and it should be given within the first 24 hours. They have done to see the outcome of neurodevelopmental outcome. But what was surprising to them is they have seen there is a decrease in incidence of your bronchopulmonary dysplasia in these babies. BPD was significantly less in babies who got a prophylactic caffeine which was initiated within the first 24 hours. The adjusted odds ratio was 0.64. It is 0.64 times lesser in babies who got a prophylactic caffeine group. So caffeine we give in a loading dosage of 20 milligram per kg, and then we give a maintenance dosage of somewhere between 5 to 10 mg per kg. Next comes your thing of therapeutic hypothermia. Therapeutic hypothermia, we know this is the mechanism of injury, right? The hypoxic ischemic results decrease your ATP, membrane depolarization, excitatory amino acids are released. If the excitatory amino acids are released, 3 receptors they act on. One is your NMDA receptor, one is your AMPA receptor, other one is your metatropic receptors. These cause the influx of calcium or sodium depolarization, and they release a lot of proteases, phosphorylase enzymes, stimulates your apoptosis, and then cause your programmed cell death, right? This is the way it's going to go, brain injury, neurons are going to get damaged in case of asphyxia. So hypothermia almost acts on almost all the pathways. The free radical, decreased consumption of your ATP, your nitric oxide synthase, free radical production. It acts on almost all the pathways to decrease your injury in the babies. So these are some of the things which are in experimental where it works. So the mechanism of action is to decrease the cerebral metabolism, decrease your edema, decrease energy utilization, decrease your free radical injury, inhibits your apoptosis, attenuates the secondary neuronal damage. There are some side effects of hypothermia. It can cause a bradycardia, it can cause an increase in pressures, especially your pulmonary pressures, a drop in your blood pressure on rewarming, abnormal coagulation abnormalities like DAVC could be a manifestation, could be a problem when you are giving a baby a cooling, hypokalemia could be an issue, and there is a increased chance of sepsis and go for a therapeutic cooling. So this is a systematic review by Jacobs on hypothermia. So 11 RCTs, 11 RCTs. When it comes to mortality, there is a 25% decrease in your mortality. That means by 11 babies you are going to treat, number need to benefit, 11 babies you are going to treat, 1 baby you can save the baby. Similarly, major disability, you have a RR, there is a 23% decrease in your disability. Here also your number need to benefit is 11 babies. If you are going to cool the baby, 1 baby definitely is going to get benefited. Okay. What is the temperature we cool? We cool around some 33 degree plus or minus 0.5 degree centigrade is going to be the temperature which we cool for 72 hours, and then slowly rewarm for next 6 hours. Next past 5 to 6 years, another change or a newer thing which has happened is your minimal invasive surfactant technique or the least invasive surfactant administration, the MIST or the lizard technique. The original insure is what we say, it's intubate, surfactant and extubate the baby to CPAP. This is what you say. Intubate, SUR is for surfactant, extubate to CPAP. The original insure, how did they do was, they gave first they gave caffeine citrate, then they gave morphine to sedate the baby, and they gave thiopental for sedation, and then they did an intubation, then they gave a morphine, reversal of morphine they gave naloxone, and then a short duration of mechanical ventilation for 1. So they gave morphine, they gave thiopental. The failure rate was pretty high in the initial phase, right? Obviously, when you're giving morphine, the baby is going to be apneic and it's very difficult for us to extubate. Then, as I'm saying, this is around some 20 years before, right? Then we evolved, then we are not administrating morphine as a routine before giving an insure, right? We intubate, we give the surfactant and extubate. Now, what they've seen, the size of the tracheal tube, we put a size tracheal tube inside, that's a biological thing, right? It is a foreign body to the trachea. By inserting such a big catheter, it stimulates your inflammatory mechanism. There is an injury to your trachea that predisposes your development of your That's causes your biotrauma and causes your BPD. That's one of the hypotheses for your BPD. So now what we have done, yeah, next 5 minutes I finish. So what they are using now is they are giving a smaller catheters, just like a size of your OG tube. They make the OG tube stiff or various catheters, your IV catheters. They insert your catheters and they give a surfactant through this. You have to intubate, give surfactant to that, and they try to pull it out. They pull it out. By doing this, they have found out that the BPD, the oxygen dependency at 20 days is less, as well as the reintubation required within the first 7 days is less. Okay. So most of the interventions for BPD prevention, there's not a magic number. Any intervention decreases the BPD by around some 8 to 11%. Okay. There's no magic medicines for BPD. All multiple small interventions are required, but all these interventions will decrease by 8%, 7%, 11%. This is one of the things which adds to that, like caffeine, which decreases. Your minimally invasive surfactant administration also decrease the incidence of your BPD. This is a chart showing that after MIST, you can see the saturation level dropping over thing. These are various things after, example of your FiO2 requirement also comes down, your CPAP requirement also comes down. There is a possibility there could be a reflex when you are giving your MIST. These are the various methods. Obat was the one and Cullen was the initial pioneers who started in 2007. These are the various things where they used angiocatheters, feeding tubes. Feeding tubes are the things which are used for giving surfactant. So if the duration of supplemental oxygen was decreased by around 2.5 days, CPAP requirement was decreased by 1 day. Decreased incidence of BPD was also there, and no difference in your mortality. These are some of the papers or meta-analysis of your ELISA technique. So, okay, go to the next intervention of delivery room CPAP. It's proved beyond doubt that CPAP has to be given in the delivery room. If the baby has any respiratory distress or workout breathing is more, or baby is having fast breathing, for a preterm baby, you're supposed to give CPAP. Why? Once the atelectasis happens, if you're not going to give CPAP, you're just going to give oxygen and atelectasis happens, it's very difficult to open the lungs. You have to give more pressures to open out the alveoli, right? Already the atelectatic trauma has happened. You'll be banging the lungs, you'll be giving more pressures, you'll be causing more barometric pressures, you are going to cause barotrauma along with volutrauma, along with atelectatic trauma. So keep the alveoli open in the delivery room. So we are supposed to give CPAP for babies, keep the alveoli open. It's just like a balloon. If the balloon is half filled, it is easy to open the balloon out. Okay. If the balloon is completely collapsed, it's difficult to open the balloon. You have to give extra pressure to open the balloon. That's something to your alveoli. If you're going to keep the CPAP there, if it's partially open, lesser amount of pressures may be required to inflate it further. If you're allowing it to completely collapse, then you have to bang everything and inflate further. So that's the advantage of your delivery room CPAP. So respiratory support in preterm, there are consensus from AAP as well as NICE. Based on the consensus what they say, a conclusion. So the use of CPAP with subsequent selective surfactant administration extremely premature infants results in lower rates of BPD and death when compared with the treatment of prophylactic or early surfactant. Level of evidence is 1. That means systematic reviews are available. Preterm infants treated with the early CPAP are not at increased risk of adverse outcomes if treatment with surfactant is late or not given. So if you are going to give CPAP, the requirement of surfactant might come down by even 45%. The baby might escape with your CPAP itself without requiring surfactant. If you are going to give early CPAP, the requirement of your surfactant is going to be lesser by around 40%. Early initiation of CPAP may lead to reduction in the duration of mechanical ventilation and postnatal corticosteroid therapy. The postnatal corticosteroid therapy we give for BPD. If you are going to give proper CPAP, you're not going to damage the lung, the chance of baby developing BPD is going to be less. So obviously the requirement of steroids going to be less later. So using CPAP immediately after birth with subsequent selective admission may be considered as an alternative routine intubation with prophylactic and early effect. So TPS is the equipment we used in a delivery room to give CPAP, right? So you can adjust your PIP and PEEP in this valves. These are two valves there where the oxygen flow is connected. Your maximum inspiratory pressure, if you're going to give a PIP, you can adjust your maximum inspiratory pressures. First few breaths you give around 20 and based upon your chest raise, you'd come down your PIPs. PEEP you have to adjust based on the valve which is there around this end. This knob is for PEEP valve. You can adjust and set the PEEP. So PEEP is somewhere started between 5 to 6 in preterm babies. So KMC, everybody knows skin to skin contact and exclusive breastfeeding are the two components. What are the prerequisites? Support to the mother in the hospital and home and post-discharge follow-up. Benefits is it's increase the duration of breastfeeding as well as thermal control. We can do an early discharge, less morbidity like apnea is less, nosocomial infection is less, Evidence also supports the same. Less hypothermia, infection, as well as follow-up rates, the breastfeeding duration is more. Right? Thank you.